The 80s had the General. The 90s had John Gilligan. In the noughties, it was the reign of Martin Marlowe Hyland. His was a familiar path with success and power, and then the recklessness. He had to go, because with him, an innocent young man doing an honest day's work died. Crime World presents Caught in the Crossfire, the unsolved murders of coke kingpin Marlowe Hyland and innocent Anthony Campbell. Available now on all podcast platforms. Eamon, take us back to April of 2022 and a video of a crash that went viral, which was pretty shocking.
Yeah, this is one. I don't know if an awful lot of people do remember it. It was a picture of an Audi Q5, a black kind of SUV vehicle on its side, and plenty of smoke coming out of the bottom of it. It was in a little supermarket, and there was a group of men sort of lying around, sitting beside it, handcuffed with bloodied faces and bandages around them, and surrounded by guards. In a little
supermarket.
It was in the supermarket car park. Yeah. So what had happened was it hit a roundabout in an area, I think it's called the Bundle of Sticks, and it was coming up the Nace Ring Road and went straight into the roundabout and flipped over like a number of times and went through a hedge, took out a kind of an electrical box, which apparently was controlling all the credit cards in the supermarket.
Right.
And luckily didn't hit anyone else. And luckily for them, I think the only injuries that were reported at one of the early stages of the case was that one of the men suffered a broken arm, but apart from that, they more or less walked away from it. Which they were lucky they weren't killed. Now, it was the end of a nearly hour-long pursuit. So they'd been basically kicking in a door of a house in rural County Meath, belonging to a woman in her 70s who lived alone, who fortunately wasn't in the house at the time. It's around 6 o'clock in the evening when it happened. Now, there had been, I think, arms response units, and there had been kind of, I think some of the specialist Garda units had been in the area because they were trying to track this particular car and this gang. Which I suppose I'll go back and explain about the car itself, which is kind of significant. But anyway, so they were spotted coming out by a neighbour who had rung the guards. Now, the guards had already been looking because the same car had been picked up on another person's CCTV and didn't like the look of these guys. They'd kind of started scoping out his house and then realised someone was in the house and had left. Now, this neighbour then saw these guys coming out of his neighbour's house, and they were wearing what was described as bumblebee glasses or goggles of some kind, and were hooded. So they were kind of spotted. The guards arrived pretty quick, and they saw the Audi Q5 and went to stop it. They were rammed, and the car then managed to pick up the two other men who were on foot, and they took off. And when I say they took off, they really took off. They went across kind of country from County Meath all the way down, heading towards the motorway at Kilcock. They got onto the motorway, I think, for just one exit, and then back onto the back roads again, and were making the way along some of the old Grand Canal roads into Nace, which are really kind of, they're narrow roads, and they were clocked at doing speeds of up to 160 kilometres an hour. They collided with at least one car on a canal bridge. You know, these kind of old, narrow little canal bridges.
Yeah, that only one car can go over at a time.
And this was all heard in Nace Circuit Court, and they actually played the Garda helicopter video. So we got to see, clips of the chase or the pursuit. I think was the phrase that they were using. It was a containment operation, I think is the phrase they used. But and there was no sign of, it was literally the helicopter was following them. There was no sign of any guards, because I mean you couldn't expect any officers to go at that kind of crazy level of speed. I mean, the chances of killing yourself is pretty huge. But there was times where you could see people in their high vis vests walking along the road, and this car zooming by them like literally inches away. There was one driver had to pull in and kind of basically went into the ditch to get out of the way. And they're, of course, ringing 999 saying, there's a couple of men in balaclavas ran me off the road. So all this is going on. They kind of undertook one car as he was turning right, and that's a car he clipped, and then took off again at high speed. It was kind of like a dogleg over a canal bridge. And then they got onto the Naas Ring Road where the chase came to an end. And it was a funny kind of thing, I suppose. But some of the charges, involved criminal damage. So he ended up being totted up at €33,000, the damage done to the Garda car, to the roundabout itself, to the electrical box, to various fencing, and didn't include the 48,000 that the Audi Q4 was valued at. And of course, there's a bit of a story to the Audi Q4 as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you who owned that? Well,
it was somebody in London, and it was taken in a residential burglary there, and had been used in, they think, they mentioned in court 17 different robberies in Northern Ireland. So it was being used by a criminal network of which these gentlemen were belonging to. Not necessarily the same individuals in all 17 burglaries in Northern Ireland. And it was being linked to a lot of other, kind of that type of activity in the south as well. So I mean, it was a car that was being used by a gang. We know the modus that they take off from wherever they are based in this case, West Dublin and Kildare, and kind of roaming the country looking for places where they can go in and break in. The whole modus operandi, we talked about it recently, the crowd in Australia doing the same thing.
Yeah.
One of these gentlemen who was charged in relation to this court, there's a warrant for his arrest, and it emerged, it was said in court, didn't say why, but he's in custody in Australia at the minute. Now, there was no mention of why he was in custody in the UK. They're a transnational gang. I mean, there's no other way to describe them. Like, if you're stealing cars, or if you're using cars stolen in London, and then, carrying out burglaries in Northern Ireland and in Ireland, and then members of your accused members of the gang then find themselves in custody in other jurisdictions, you're a transnational gang, you're an international crime gang.
So what happened to them after they're sat in handcuffs, on the forecourt of the Lidl?
Yeah, Lidl or Lidl. What is it now? I'm going to have this one.
How do you say it?
I know
people say Lidl.
I go with
which I think is really.
Well, that's only in South County Dublin, I imagine. Is it? Lidl.
Lidl.
We'll go with the Lidl, I think, or Lidl, whatever you prefer.
Lidl.
But anyway, so yeah, no, they were brought to court like within a day or two. I remember I was definitely at the first kind of district court hearing where there was a bit of information, a bit of background given about how serious these guys were, and they were actually linked in open court to the Pale Miley gang, who we've spoken about before. So I mean, the older, basically of the five guys. So one of them was William Connors. I think he's 48 now or something like that, and he was the oldest. All the other guys were kind of, some of them were teenagers. They were 19, 18, 19, 20. I think there was a 22-year-old in the car. So he was very much the leader, and he was the driver. So, and they were all charged then with conspiracy to burglary. That's kind of the main charge against them, which attracts, I think, a maximum 14-year sentence for that. So, he's as the driver, he's got a lot more additional charges, including all the different counts of reckless endangerment. Where for each time, as he whizzed by the pedestrians, or there was a cyclist as well going close to the other cars, clipping the other cars. So he's charged with all those, to which he pleaded guilty. Right. He was arraigned again on last Friday, and kind of he pleaded guilty to it. He was actually on bail, but remanded in custody when he would be sentenced.
So they all got bail basically after they were initially charged.
They would have got. I think they were actually on bail, and then if I remember, they were brought back to court. To the district court, actually, which is one of the ones I attended, where they'd been charged with, I think, being part of a gangland, being part of an organised crime gang. Now, they didn't actually face these charges, so obviously they were kind of let go, and they pleaded guilty to the conspiracy charges, and they had to go for bail again, but they did actually get bail. Now, one of them had his bail revoked. I think it was Michael had his bail revoked at one point.
Michael Connors.
Yeah, Michael Connors, and it was mentioned, that he wasn't handling being in prison very well. He was very unwell.
Diddums.
And he didn't look great in court, in fairness. Now it was reasonably chaotic in court. There was a lot of family members there. There was attempts to pass on a pack of cigarettes to one of the fellas, and the prison officers weren't having it, and it was handed back. And I think William at one point, had to stop the trial so he could use the toilet. So he was kind of escorted out with a couple of the organised crime unit who had brought the case. They were the officers giving evidence. Detective Sergeant Donald Donoghue was the main Garda witness. So he was led through the whole recounting of the case. So they had to take a break along with Willie while he was using the facilities anyway. So there was a bit of surprise then when he was remanded in custody after it was heard. Martina Baxter, the judge, was kind of said, look, these are very serious matters. He's in prison. His son Larry isn't. Like he was very much
in Australia now.
We've won in Australia. I think, that's James, I think, who has mentioned that, there's a warrant for his arrest.
So he skipped bail, obviously.
So,
yeah.
Well, there was a warrant for his arrest and he's in custody in Australia. That's basically what was said in court. His son Larry is much younger and, he pleaded guilty as well to the conspiracy charge. Now, they weren't charged with any actual burglary. There was no evidence kind of put forward that they actually carried out any burglaries on this occasion. And of course, his previous were read out in court and he didn't have any. Whereas the other guys kind of were kind of in the realm of 5 or 6 sort of relevant 5 or 6, say, relevant kind of previous convictions, like, carrying implements to be used in a burglary or attempted burglary, those kind of charges. Whereas William had quite a much longer form guide. I suppose he had 27 previous. And interestingly enough, he was just 1 year out from finishing up his last 20-year driving ban when he went on this escapade, being chased across 2 counties for an hour by the Garda helicopter.
So the Pale Miley gang, and they've been the target of Operation Fiacla, isn't it? Which was the Garda.
A couple of operations, yeah, but that was one of the big ones, yeah.
Over the decades. But they would be strongly linked to Fat Andy Connors, who was murdered in 2014. He sort of headed up that burglary gang. They come from the West Dublin area largely. They used fast cars. They went down into rural Ireland and terrorised people in their homes. But you'd wonder, what that 72-year-old woman who thankfully wasn't in her home when they were at the door, because terrifying 5 men arriving to, come in and do whatever they needed to do to get at your possessions. What sort of things do they get in houses? They wouldn't get anything in mine.
Well, they go for cash and gold, anything pretty small, like
in the wrong jobs.
But the way they work, their modus operandi is to just do so many of them that you're going to get lucky. I mean, they were linked to like this. The car that was used was linked to a robbery in which €250,000 worth of jewellery was taken.
Now that has to be targeted because there's not many people with that amount of jewellery in their homes, surely.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt. And members of this wider gang, like we know Fat Andy's son, Jonathan, also known as Jonathan Sluicy, like they were part of a group operating in the UK. And we spoke about this before where they were using tracking devices and they were basically watching Asian restaurants and figuring out who the owner was and then which car they were using and then put a tracker on it, wait till they go home to see where they live, wait for them to go back to the restaurant and then break into the house. And because they figured that these are people who are keeping cash, trying to keep it offside to minimise their tax exposure or whatever. So these guys will go in and steal the money. And
were they also involved in certain sort of home repairs, maybe in tarmacking, and they were able to suss out properties from that, or had they any connections to any of those groups?
Yeah, there's some of them, because there was another case, if you remember, Thomas Wall, whose house was auctioned off recently, was a small enough 3-bed semi-D bungalow in Newbridge, County Kildare. And I think that went for 246,000 there the week before last. So that was mentioned in his case. Like, they've been in the States and all the rest, himself and his wife, and they changed the name by deed poll from Wall to Connors. Which they said was because of a falling out, but really was to get
why?
Well, it was to get around having overstayed their tourist visa in the US, so they could go back to the US at some point. So there was a lot of unexplained money used to buy the house and went through bank accounts. But one of it was they were able to track a payment made by an elderly gentleman I think it was in Crumlin, and they figured out that he had actually been conned by these home repair guys. And so this money went into an account controlled, according to CAB, by this member of a prolific burglary gang. So they do
share intel,
diversify,
maybe.
And absolutely. And I mean, knocking on doors to do home repairs is a good way to case out areas and and to figure out if someone's wealthy. And I mean, if it's what you do all day long, you're going to be very adept at spotting, a nice old lady down in the supermarket who's wearing an expensive piece of jewelry, and you're going to know the difference between costume jewelry and the real stuff. I mean, when my house was broken into, all the costume jewelry was left there, and my wife was a bit put out that nothing was taken.
Yeah.
We're just, I'm too cheap.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can tell you I'd be exactly the same. There's no point in anyone coming knocking on my door. But so, and as regards the jewellery, like €250,000 of jewellery, like...
Sorry, that was actually sterling pounds. I should have said, so it was more than that.
So that's more about whatever, 280.
Don't ask me to do a conversion straight away. Yeah.
But like, they must have, at this point, this gang are around so long. How long are they around? 30 years.
As long as I've been in the Sunday world, been writing about them. I mean, at one point we called them the 70 years ago. At one point, we were calling them the Subaru gang.
Yeah.
The cigarette gang, the gypsy gang. There's various iterations, and again, it was always the same modus operandi. It was a lot of kind of high volume, low level burglaries. They'd do 5 robberies of filling stations to get at the cigarettes because they were valuable and could be easily sold. Then there's all those filling stations. It got to the point where they just had to completely change the way they worked. I mean, they couldn't have cigarettes where they could be stolen easily. You're going to have to delay these guys because they were just going in, ramming their way in, just ripping out whatever they needed and taking off again, and being totally unconcerned about the Garda response, which again was the reason why the Garda helicopter there was a big hurry to get it going, was to kind of curb their escapade. So they're going for years. Now, it's not the same individuals. In some cases, you can be sure that this Willie Connors, who was driving the Q5 and nearly killed himself landing in a little car park, that he's been involved. He has these previous convictions. But in terms of I suppose the lesser lights, they're gonna kind of float through. But you're talking anything. I mean, there was estimates at one point that it's anything from sort of 20 to 50 or 60 active members. So and on any given night there'd be 5 or 6 hard at work. And this is going on while other people are in other jurisdictions doing the same thing. So. And
it sort of comes up every now and then, the sort of the fears of rural communities about this kind of burglary gangs, and then we don't hear anything about it. But it's clearly going on all the time. I mean, they're not taking breaks.
I think these particular gangs, the ones based in West Dublin, and and some of them are loosely related. And I mean, and in a way, Fat Andy was kind of, he had both sides of the family. He was related to both sides, if you know what I mean. There was the people who've become known as the Cockwalls were kind of on one side, and then the Pale Miley gang were on the other. But,
and where were the Cockwalls from or based?
Again, the same area. They're kind of West Dublin, that kind of Tala area. And again, they're interconnected with the wider Connors clan as well. But there would have been an element of separation. So you'd have both gangs at different times would be getting targeted by specific Garda operations like Operation Fiacla and all the rest. But I mean, they're hard. You have to catch them in the act, which happened in this case with Willie Connors and his son Larry and the other 2 guys who've been convicted now. But you look at the resources that had to go into that, mad escapades. I mean, how many times when, in 20 years ago or even more recently, where you have the initial Garda patrol car was out from Trim, it was a Hyundai, and they were basically rammed by this Audi Q5. And so, I mean, that's very much the end of their input into into any kind of operation to contain these guys. So I mean, when it took the specialist units, it took armed guards, and it took the helicopter and all of that. And that
chase, so what they're trying to do, there's obviously nobody expecting the Garda car to drive at that speed after them. What they're trying to do is, from a height, see opportunities to cut them off, and that's the whole idea of a containment. They'll wait and see when, they're obviously trying to figure out, we got to block off either end of a street at some point, even if that street is, a 2-mile long stretch of road beside a canal, or whether it's a part of a ring road, outside Nason, which in this case. So, I mean, once they, it's easier to cut someone off on a motorway because you simply block the exits. But I mean, I suppose the only thing going in their favour is just the sheer speed. Now, I'm sure they hit more than 160 on the motorway, and you could see the clip where, I mean, they just tore up the inside lane. Everybody, I mean, it's a frightening experience if you're, pootling along at the standard 120k,
and something shoots by at, you know, kind of going at 50% faster than you, and they were cutting cars going off the actual exit ramps as well, going up the inside, even, you know, and these are the curving ramps. So, you know, it was a dangerous kind of maneuver that, you know, if you tip someone at the back, you're gonna spin the car and potentially, you know, flip them into traffic. So yeah, the guards aren't allowed, and they don't, and sensibly don't, like, go at that speed to try and, you know, catch them.
You have a double chance then of really killing a pedestrian, or
absolutely, or yourself, like,
you're doubling it up. William Connors, having said all that, obviously believed he was an absolutely fantastic driver, that he was going to escape this. I mean, you'd imagine with the Garda helicopter up in the air, you know, you give up, surely.
Or he had a lot of faith in his abilities, or it was a case of just don't give up and hope that you get away. There has to be some element of thrill to it. I mean, you do wonder when you're in your late 40s, can you still get your kicks that way? Like, you know.
And with 4 young people in the car, including your own son, you must know that the chances of the car, you know, if you're losing control of the car, you're traveling at that speed, everyone is probably going to be killed at 160. Would anybody survive that if they'd crashed at that speed?
It'd be tricky, all right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I know that all these cars have got the state-of-the-art safety, you know, in terms of roll bars.
And they probably only survive because they're in an Audi Q5.
Yeah, and I suppose they hit the roundabout, like it's kind of a sloped brick roundabout that's maybe 3 foot high. So that would have taken a lot of speed off without kind of damaging the compartment that these guys are actually sitting in. Then it took off and rolled. So presumably the airbags would have been intact and would have inflated or whatever, and prevented people from getting head injuries. Plus then the roll bar would stop it, the roof from caving in and the sides of it from caving in. So all the safety features of the high-end car that they stole, like, you know, probably saved their lives, you know. It's
a kind of almost a criminal lifestyle, isn't it? Rather than, they're not after the big one. They're working this job week in, week out, and there's so many of them within the gang. Now, they have the likes of Fat Andy Connors, who was, you know, I think it says on his grave stone, big, fat, rich Andy Connors. He did get rich as such, certainly assets-wise. I think 9 properties were identified as being part of his portfolio, and there's certainly a revenue case, I think, was underway against his wife in pursuit of those properties or payment in relation to them. But like, there's a lot of them, obviously, to get paid out of what could be, while some of those robberies are targeted, presumably some of them are also opportunistic, and they're going into a house not knowing, are they going to come out of it with, you know, an iPad?
Yeah, a little bit of pot luck, you know. It's all fun and games, like going into the bookies and putting on 6 cross doubles and a few singles on a 1-horse race, and, you know, and hoping that your number's going to come up, and so, you know. And I mean, we saw that with the likes of Fat Andy, like being caught in a garden, like not shortly before he was killed, and even Pale Miley, I think, still had charges outstanding when he died in his late 70s. So, I mean, it is a lifestyle. Without a doubt, it's a lifestyle choice for some of these guys. Now, like William Connors, I doubt he's rich. I mean, it was mentioned in court, again, as part of the mitigation, like he had addiction issues and medical issues, and that, you know, and he was making attempts to kind of deal with this. But of course, we always hear that in these cases, like, you know. But I mean, they certainly didn't present as being a very wealthy group of people who were there.
So he is facing himself up to 14 years. That's the maximum sentence he's unlikely to get because he's pleaded guilty. And the others, you know, there could be a significant amount of years between them.
Yeah, I think, it's hard to know because there is a bit of a difference between the records. I mean, his son Larry has no previous convictions, and there was positive reports, I think, that were referred to in court. They're going to look for more. I think that there's more reports due, which is why the case, you know, the next hearing probably isn't going to be a sentence hearing as well. And I think while 2 of them were, their counsel kind of said, look, they're ready to go ahead and, you know, have everything dealt with. But the judge says, no, we'll keep everyone together. So,
have any of them suggested that they were traumatized by the incident?
No.
Right. I would have been.
No, they didn't.
I was a
No.
passenger in that car.
Oh, I'd say even being close to it or witnessing, I'd say it was traumatic. I mean, I have to say, like there was the lady whose house was broken into that started. It was mentioned that she was traumatized, even though she wasn't there.
I would have been.
You know, because I mean, your house is broken into, and you're in a nice. Like, it was a rural area, but it was a small little estate. So she did have neighbours, and in fairness, they all did the right thing. So, I mean, she should take comfort from that. She also should take comfort from the fact that these guys are out of the business of robbing houses at the moment.
I think it's that whole idea of somebody, your home is where you feel safest, and the idea that somebody would actually come to your doorstep and, go in and ransack. And I mean, it happened to you. It's not a nice feeling.
No, it's not. It's rotten. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Like, and these guys, like, I mean, they know how to enter a house quickly, whether they'll crowbar open a window or kick in the back door, which they did in this case. So, and they went straight for the bedroom. They didn't touch anywhere else and just went looking for the jewellery. And that's the modus operandi. They don't waste time. We saw that in one of the cases in the UK where one of these gangs, it was an Irish one, the crowd from Limerick. And we saw the video of the three of them, quickly moving into the house and each going to specific areas. Like, they were hitting kind of the hidey holes where people hide stuff in kitchens, and another person going to the bedroom looking for the jewelry box. So they know the drill when they're breaking into places.
Yeah, I remember it being broken into years ago. Now, I was renting at the time, and we were asleep in bed, and the window in the sort of the living room of the apartment was crowbarred open, and the weirdest thing, actually, we moved out, to be honest with you, after it, but there was stuff taken from my bedside locker while I was asleep.
Yes, nothing worse.
Oh,
yeah.
That really took a long time to kind of feel a little bit safe after that.
Not pleasant.
No. Okay, well, look, they're before the courts, and we'll await to see how the sentencing goes. So thank you very much, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.